Alright, hi guys, welcome back. We're ready to start World War II. Let me make sure this is recording and that it's not too crooked. I think it looks pretty good. Alright, cool. Alright, so like I said, we're ready to start World War II. We're moving on from the Great Depression in the United States, and we're going to do World War II. And it's going to be divided up into 3 videos. The first video, we're going to do some background on what was going on in Europe, and so we got to talk politics. Not a big fan of talking politics and political stuff and government, but unfortunately we have to. So the first thing we're going to go over is fascism, communism, and totalitarianism, and I'll explain what all those mean. From there, we'll talk about why the United States stayed neutral for a long time, but honestly, we weren't really that neutral. We were helping out England and the Allies for quite a while before the war. And then from there, we'll talk a little bit about the Holocaust. I wish we could spend more time talking about the Holocaust because it is a very interesting topic. It's a very terrible and sad topic, but it seems like students are always very interested in it because it's a unique and really kind of scary thing. But first of all, let's start with this, some government stuff, and we'll move on from there. So let me give you some background on Europe, because World War II did begin in Europe. It began with Nazi Germany invading Poland. But there's reasons why, and we're going to go through those. So let's just do that right now. All right. Remember to pause this video as needed. This is probably going to be a little bit on the longer side. Remember to download the PowerPoints from my website, and remember to email me if you have any questions. Let's rock and roll. Okay, so the first thing we got to do is the rise of fascism, communism, and totalitarianism. Now, I'm going to tell you all these things rely on having very strong leaders, and that doesn't really mean strong in a good way. It can mean strong in a bad way. And Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini are 2 of the people that we're going to talk about, and also Joseph Stalin. And all 3 of those guys really have a bad image in history. Not good people, okay? But they were in history, and we are going to talk about them, so let's go ahead and let's jump right in, all right? So the first thing you need to know is about fascism. Fascism is just extreme loyalty and obedience to your country. And notice it says state. I'm going to say state a few times in this video, but it means country, okay? So fascism, like I said, it's extreme loyalty and it's national pride and service to the state or to the leader. And it begins in Italy. Benito Mussolini is really one of the best first examples of fascism in world history, okay? And the reason why Mussolini is that example is because of the strength of his leadership. Italy during the 1930s was struggling, okay? Most of the world was struggling because of the global depression. And Mussolini is a very strong leader, or was a very strong leader for Italy. And the reason why is because he promised to bring back the greatness and restore the glory of ancient Rome. Rome is in Italy, and he wanted to rebuild a great big empire, all right? So fascism can really be basically broken down into extreme loyalty and obedience, so extreme patriotism, national pride, empire building, and it also relies on having an enemy. And when we get to Hitler, Adolf Hitler, we're going to discuss who the enemy is. And really for Hitler, it's any free people in the world, but he really focused on the Jews, okay? So let's rock and roll. So that's Mussolini there. Here are some more breakdowns of what fascism is, so you can take a look. I'm not going to go through it and read it all to you, but this is Mussolini, and there's Hitler there, all right? All right, now, a big key component of fascism is that they have a secret police. They want to control the media. The reason why they want to control the media is they want their leader to appear as great as possible. They don't want a free media that can report on anything negative about that leader. They want everyone to believe that this man is perfect in every way and that everything he's doing is right and correct. So, to enforce that, to keep people from speaking out against what he's doing, they have a secret police, all right? And for Mussolini, the secret police were a group of people called the Black Shirts. And this is them right here, and that's the word, Black Shirts right there, okay? They would throw people in jail. They would murder people who would go against Mussolini, and they fully controlled society. They also put out pro-Mussolini propaganda. We've talked a little bit about propaganda, but we're going to talk about it a lot in World War II. Propaganda is any kind of media or art that promotes a message, and it's usually biased, so it has a one-sided message, okay? So all citizens were expected to pledge their loyalty to Mussolini and to Italy. All right, moving right along. Fascism has a symbol. That's it right there. It's all these rods tied around kind of a hatchet or an axe. and these are more members of the black shirts, the Italian black shirts. And that is propaganda for Mussolini there. All right. Now, the reason why this works, or the reason why it worked back then, is because these leaders were very strong. Both Mussolini and Hitler were very strong leaders, and they actually did a lot for their country. I don't want to speak positively of either one of these individuals because they're both terrible, terrible people. However, as far as the economy in both Italy and Germany go, both of these guys did a pretty good job of rebuilding those economies and getting their countries out of the Depression. So people actually really liked these guys, unfortunately. They saw the strength of their leadership and they kind of followed them and they adopted their mentalities. Also, the media was so corrupt at that time that the stuff that they reported on was not telling the truth about these guys. It wasn't telling the truth that these guys were evil and that they were murderers and that they were doing really bad things. It would only report on the progress and the success and the good things that they actually did. And so it's a really bad situation where they have total control and they corrupt society in a way that makes them appear almost to be godlike, which is really, really just not good, okay? Unfortunately, so Mussolini was one of the first fascists in world history, like I said, to use the term fascism. There have been fascists throughout world history, really a lot of world history has fascism. But the term fascist is applied to Mussolini. He comes first, and Hitler takes notice in Germany, and he really models his ways after Mussolini and really takes it a step further because he perpetrates the Holocaust. And we're going to talk about that later, okay? There you go. So there they are, the two evil friends, one of the most evil duos to ever exist in history. Okay, now we're going to switch gears here and talk about communism because fascism and communism kind of have some things in common, and I'm going to go to the next slide to show you what I'm talking about here. So both things, fascism and communism, rely on a dictatorship. There's only one political party, and that'll be the Communist Party, okay? They don't give a lot of rights to their citizens, and we're going to talk about that in just a second. The state or the country has all the power, all the rules, and this is not a democratic situation, okay? So let me go back. So what communism does is it abolishes social and economic classes. It levels everyone in society. Now you might be sitting at home thinking, well, that actually sounds pretty good. And in theory, communism isn't a bad idea, but it doesn't work, and there's a lot of reasons why, okay? So what it does is it abolishes all social and economic classes. It makes everyone equal. The playing field is totally equal. And it gives all power and all property to the state. All money, all property is distributed by the state. So that keeps everybody on a level playing field, all right? So that is a good thing in that technically everyone is equal. However, it kills a lot of motivation in society because if you can do very little work and someone can do a whole lot of work and you're only getting the same pay, it's going to really kill any motivation that anyone has in society, okay? And not only that, but everything you do, because the government is so powerful, it is for the state. There's no room for free thinking. There's no room for criticism. There's nothing like that. And so the government becomes extremely powerful because they control everything, essentially, all right? Now, like I said, the equality part, that sounds fantastic, but unfortunately it doesn't really work that way in a society. It would be really great, and I'm not saying it's not like the theory that is in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution that all men are created equal. This is totally separate from that. What this is doing is it's the government doing a forced equality on people that doesn't work, okay? And what it does is just gives the government an extreme amount of power. And it lowers the standard of living to a point where everybody is equal, but it's kind of like everybody's kind of poor, all right? The most famous example of this in history is the Soviet Union, and we're going to talk a lot about them, so I won't elaborate too much there. All right, so there's some more stuff in case you're interested. For fascism, it is a class-filled society versus communism is a class-less society. And what that means is they're talking about some class in fascism. For example, Jewish people in Nazi Germany were persecuted. So they're going to be the lowest class. And for Nazi society, that's going to be the Aryans. And so that means the group of people who are the master race. Okay? And we'll talk more about them later. All right? So where does communism come from? It comes from this book, The Communist Manifesto, written by these guys, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. And this really sparked a lot of ideas because here's the thing. In Europe at the time, the Industrial Revolution was going on. on. It comes later to America, but if you remember, industry really put a big strata, a big problem with wealth inequality in the world. And we've talked about this in this class, where you've got a huge group of people who are very, very, very poor, and they kind of serve the very, very small elite upper class. And if you remember feudalism from medieval Europe, that plays into this too, where you have a giant class of peasants or serfs or even slaves who serve lords and ladies above them who are a very small class. So this idea really appealed to poor people in Europe back in the day, okay? And it caused revolutions. It caused a revolution in Russia in 1917. China's had multiple communist revolutions. The first one was in 1921, and then they had one in 1949. And so communism appealed to people around the world because of this book. There have been attempts of communism in America, but it seems like America, it will probably never be communist, which honestly is probably a really good thing. A free market and a free society. America does have its issues with inequality, but a free market and a free society really is the way to go. All right, and we'll talk more about that. Email me if you got any questions about that, okay? All right. So there you see a timeline of communism. There's a few different communist revolutions. We'll talk later towards the end of the year about the fall of communism. It's very interesting about what went wrong. But the Cold War, we're going to spend a huge amount of time talking about it. Okay? So here we go. So the Soviet Union, like I said, it is the most powerful example of a communist country. Now, Joseph Stalin is a leader that you need to remember. So we've got Benito Mussolini, he's a leader of Italy, fascist leader. Adolf Hitler, another fascist leader, leader of Germany, Nazi Germany. And now we get Stalin, who was leader of the Soviet Union, which later becomes Russia. He was leader until 1953. I believe he went into power in the late 19teens, 1920s. But anyways, he is a major, powerful leader for communist Soviet Union, and he unfortunately did some really bad things. Millions and millions of people were murdered under Stalin's leadership who spoke out against communism and who spoke out against him. Just a bad person. Now, I don't want to say anything really positive about him. However, under Stalin's leadership, the Soviet Union became a major world power. He put industry at the top of his list of priorities. He really made the Soviet Union a very powerful country, and we'll talk about that here in just a little while. But it unfortunately, well, really fortunately for us, it fell in the late 1980s and early 1990s, it was the United States and the Soviet Union fought in a Cold War for a long time. This is a complicated topic, and that's why I keep getting tripped up, because I'm thinking so much ahead. And we're going to talk a lot about communism and the Cold War. So my thoughts are kind of running really fast. So there you go. All right. So this is Stalin. Some Stalinistic propaganda there. The little baby that he's holding up. He's got the Soviet Union flag. And now let's talk about how he's a totalitarian leader and what that means. Okay. So totalitarianism. Totalitarianism, you can see total is the base word, total power is what the base of that is. And totalitarianism is the result of communism and fascism put together. So remember, fascism is that kind of evil type of leadership where all the people are devoted to the leader, all the people are devoted to the state, the country, and it's an extreme form of patriotism where you look down on everyone else who doesn't think the same way as you. Then you put communism with that, where the government controls all resources and all people are equal. Remember, they're kind of suffering under this extremely powerful government. And what you get is a totalitarian government. And a totalitarian government, there's no freedom for thought, there's no freedom for information, and really there's no free speech, free thinking, anything like that. So the government controls everything. A lot of times they'll be categorized by secret police and spies, things like that. And there are modern day examples of totalitarian governments. They still exist today. So when under a totalitarian government, they have control over religion. You have to do whatever the state religion is, whatever the country's religion is. They have total control over the economy. Like I said, they're usually communists. They have total control over education. So you have to teach exactly what they want you to teach in exactly the way they say it. So a lot of the things I said right now, if I were living in a totalitarian society, I might get in trouble for. Like if I lived in Stalinist Russia and I said anything negative about him, he would probably send the secret police after me, okay? Thankfully, that doesn't exist, okay, anymore. They also keep an eye on your family. They, I'm sure most of you have heard, or if not, there was a system in China where you could only have a certain number of children. It lasted throughout the 20th century. I'm not sure exactly when that ended, but they have complete control over family and, most importantly, the media. They only want positive things said about them for the government. They only want the government to have a positive image in the people's mind because they want the people working for and serving the government, okay? All right. Now, some famous examples of this are, of course, Mussolini's Italy. They had the black shirts, the secret police, okay? Hitler's Germany, they had the SS, the secret police. Modern day North Korea, and of course Stalin's Russia, I skipped that one. Modern day North Korea is still an example of a totalitarian government. You can't even leave North Korea, okay? And they have prison camps there for people who speak out against them. If you go there and you do something that they don't like, they will throw you in an extreme prison. Essentially, the people have little to no rights, all right? And secret police and the military control everything, all right? Anything that is seen as an outside threat or influence or just anything that's even different is going to be neutralized. And what neutralized means, it means either thrown in jail or killed, okay? And it goes back to this. If you want a good example of totalitarian government in fiction, I highly suggest reading the book 1984. It's fantastic, by George Orwell. Okay? So some more examples. So Hitler, Stalin, Mussolini. These are members of the Nazi secret police here, and these are either Nazis or black shirt people here. Okay. All right. So let's write this down. And put this over here too. All right. Let me get my pen. I'll be right back. Here I am. All right. So let's write these down. What are 4 key components of fascist ideology? So, complete loyalty to the country. Okay? You're also going to have empire building. There will be some form of racism or creating an enemy. So, looking down on someone, racism / creating an enemy. So for example, like the Jews in Europe for Hitler. So like European Jews for this example. In history, not a current example. Talking about this stuff makes me a little bit nervous. And lastly, few or no rights for the people. No freedom. Little freedom. Everything is controlled for the leader, for the country, for the state. You serve them. Complete service to the state. Okay? And we can even write that too. There's a lot that goes in this. And it's a complicated topic. And this word nowadays, fascism, it gets thrown around a lot, but it really shouldn't. People shouldn't really use that word as much as they should when they're describing these things. Because Mussolini, Hitler, and Stalin, those were some really, really, really bad dudes. Complete service to the country. Okay? Why is communism a good idea in theory? Like I said, in theory, it's a good idea because everyone is equal. So we're going to say an equal or classless society where you don't have wealth inequality. But the reason why is because the government controls everything and they keep everybody equal, but it's going to be a very low standard of living. And why is it a bad idea in practice? Government becomes extremely powerful because they control everything. Explain how a totalitarian government operates. They have total control over everything. Total control over all aspects of society. And then 3 to 4 examples in history. Italy, Mussolini's Italy, not currently. Italy is no longer this. Italy, Nazi Germany, Soviet Union, and of course, modern day North Korea. China is not necessarily totalitarian. However, China doesn't really value freedom of information, and I really hope some Chinese government official is not watching this. I'm not getting weird about that, okay? But China historically did not value freedom of information. I guess that's what I should say. So there you go. There you go. So let me take a look at this and make sure. I think the handwriting is a little bad. I think it's okay though. I think it's legible. All right, if you have any questions, let me know. And guys, this really makes me uncomfortable to talk about because we live in a very contentious world now. And I don't mean anything offensive at all. So if you have any issues, please let me know and we can work it out, okay? Because I'm not trying to say anything bad about anybody or anybody's beliefs or anything like that, because it is okay to be a communist. I mean, that's fine. It's really not okay to be a fascist. However, we live in a free world where you're allowed to believe what you want to believe. So there you go. All right, so let's rock and roll and talk about some actual history, which I'm excited about, and we're getting closer and closer to World War II. So that sets the stage for what was going on in Europe at the time. You have these extremely powerful governments who are making big moves, all right? They're starting to take over other places. Hitler's Nazi Germany is expanding, okay? And this is a problem because here in America, FDR was looking at this and the rest of the world is looking at this, and America was literally the #1 world power at the time. And everybody's looking at America and they're saying, well, what are y'all going to do about this? And you got to think about World War I. After World War I, America's like, yo, leave Europe alone. We don't want to mess with them. But we do have a responsibility because now our friends, aka England and France from World War I, our former allies, are starting to be under attack from Nazi Germany, okay? The late 1930s, early 1940s is what we're talking about. Nazi Germany is expanding, they invade France, France surrenders quickly, wham, wham. So many jokes to be made about France. But then Great Britain is also invaded and they have some real struggles. And so they're looking at America and they're saying, well, what are we gonna do? Americans wanna stay neutral mainly, but obviously we have to get involved in some way because our friends are involved over in Europe, okay? So let's talk about what we do at first. All right, so Hitler starts making moves in about 1936. Is when he starts being aggressive, he starts showing signs that he's going to start invading. The actual war, the invasion of Poland, is not until 1939, but they can see that these things, the fascism in Italy, the Nazism in Germany, and Japan invading China, which was earlier in the 1930s, there's some aggression going on in Europe. Hitler's giving these speeches against the Jews that are really bad. Same with Mussolini in Italy. He's arresting people. People are dying. The Japanese invasion of China was bloody. It was horrible. And so the world starts to look at America and they're like, well, what is going to happen? Okay? Now remember, Americans, the people are like, we don't want to get involved. However, they do have this kind of responsibility of like, hey, we got to do something. So FDR, right here, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was president during the time. And so he starts taking some action. First thing he does is something called a quarantine speech. And I'm really glad that I get to give I'm teaching this now. Last year I had to explain what quarantine meant. This year I don't think I have to explain at all what quarantine means. But if you're not sure, quarantine means that we're going to isolate those countries by stopping trade with them. So with this speech in 1937, FDR is saying, you know what, the United States, we're not going to mess with Germany, Italy, or Japan anymore. We're cutting y'all off. They're saying as long as y'all are behaving aggressively and doing these bad things, we're not going to be friends anymore. We are literally putting y'all in quarantine. We're cutting y'all off from trade with us. And remember, America is coming back at this point as being a world power. We're overcoming the Depression. And so this appeals to America's isolationists, the people at home who are saying, we're not fighting another war. We don't want to. But it also appeases those who are like, hey, they're doing some really bad stuff over there. So FDR's playing the game here, and he does a pretty good job, okay? So he's saying, we're not trading with these evil people anymore, but we're not fighting the war just yet, okay? All right, so there's some quotes from that. This is actually from the quarantine speech. War is a contagion, whether it be declared or undeclared. There you go. All right, now we get to 1941. So the war has actually begun in Europe, and Europe is burning, okay? And so now people are putting pressure on FDR to start being more involved. And there's not really a reason to be involved yet, okay? The United States has not been attacked just yet, but it's kind of coming, that people can see that this thing is kind of unavoidable. The United States is probably going to have to jump in. So what is our motivation? Well, remember, historically, the United States is always motivated by money. However, the United States always, in history, disguised it as being the good guy. Now, I'm going to say this. In World War II, the United States really was the good guy because we were not the Nazis who were perpetrating terrible, terrible things. The United States really is fighting for freedom in this, and really global freedom. And here is the freedoms. So Roosevelt gives another speech in 1941, and it's called the Four Freedoms speech. And here are the freedoms that he talks about. He says people everywhere in the world ought to enjoy freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom from want, meaning that your needs are met, that you should be able to have a meal at night, and you should be able to go to bed at night without fearing anything. Freedom from fear. So again, the Four Freedoms speech, it's a strategy that Roosevelt says, like, hey, we're going to have to probably get involved, and here are the reasons why. Because everyone in the world ought to be able to have freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom from want, and freedom from fear, okay? So this shows that, hey, we're getting away from isolationism, and we're heading towards, we're probably going to have to fight these Nazis, okay? Now, let's talk about what was actually going on behind the scenes. Oh, and here's some really cool art. This is all by Norman Rockwell. You may have seen his art before. So again, the four freedoms are freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear, or freedom of religion on that one too. So there you go. So what's actually happening behind the scenes? So remember, the United States, unfortunately, and I'm not speaking ill of the United States at all. I love America. It's the greatest country in the whole world. But remember, a lot of times in history, there's a lot of money that's motivating things. And kind of same deal here. So the United States is getting involved in the war behind the scenes. We're not engaging in direct action yet. But what we've begun to do at this point in history, in March 1941, early in the war still, we begin something called the Lend Lease Act. And what it did is that we offered essentially for free food, oil, and military equipment, aka weapons. We said, hey, you countries that are fighting the bad guys, the Axis powers, Germany, Italy, and Japan, these are the bad guys. So we got Allies versus Axis. The Allies are, and I hate to oversimplify, these are the good guys, the ones that we're going to help, and these are the bad guys, okay? So the Allies are British, French, Chinese, and Soviet Union. These are our friends in the war, aka the good guys, and the Axis are Germany, Italy, and Japan, okay? So we start supplying them with food, oil, and weapons. And we say, look, we know y'all are fighting a war, and this is the biggest war ever, by the way, and we're going to get to all that, all the details. This is the biggest war ever so far, way bigger than World War I. And we know they can't pay that with the, we know that these countries cannot pay for this stuff, so we offer them the Lend Lease Act. And what that says is like, hey, we're just going to keep a tab of everything that you owe us, and it's going to be about $50 billion, which is crazy. Modern day, $585 billion. And it says, hey, we're going to give you all this stuff, and you're just going to have to pay us back later. We know you can't pay for it now. It's all good. We want to see you defeat these Nazis. China, we want to see you defeat Japan because Japan was expanding with their empire, okay? And we want to see success. So we're going to offer you guys help. You're going to pay us back later. That's why it's called the Lend Lease Act, all right? Now, the Allies, especially the British, this is just a tidbit of history here. The British, they owed us so much money that they actually just got done paying it back in like 2011, I think, or 2015. Very recently, they just got done paying us back all the money that they owed us from World War II, which is pretty crazy, so, all right. So Lend Lease Act, so $11.1 billion from 1941 to 1943. It ends up being a total of $50 billion by the end of the war, but you can see how it's all spent. And so what it does, it's just a trade of equipment, food, oil, and weapons from the United States to the Allies. So what this really shows, though, is that we're in the war, all right? Whether or not we have declared war doesn't really matter. We're offering food, oil, and weapons to the enemies of the bad guys, to the allies. And so the Axis powers, they're like, they know this is going on. Germany, Japan, they take a look. Italy, they take a look, and they say, well, what is the United States doing? We see. Okay, so now we're headed towards some action. We're not going to get to any action in this video, but we will later, okay? Now, we really get to kind of, I wouldn't say aggressive action, but the United States really saying, okay, we're in this thing. They come up with a plan, the United States and England, or Great Britain, same deal, called the Atlantic Charter. And what it is, it's a plan, it's a strategy that says, you know what? The United States is going to be friends with the Allies. That's Winston Churchill, by the way, and we're going to talk more about him later. And that's Roosevelt. They're saying, hey, we're openly declaring that we are friends. They made a big show of it and everything. They shook hands. They were like, hey, we're going to help y'all out. We're kind of in this thing. And not only that, check this out. We're going to discuss the way the world will be run after we defeat Nazi Germany. So this is the U.S. really kind of throwing their hat in the ring and saying, hey, we're in this thing. They're not actually sending troops yet. Now that's important. They're not actually engaging the Nazis on the battlefield yet. That's coming, but it hasn't happened yet. All we're saying is we're going to throw lots of money at you and we're going to throw lots of equipment at you and help you guys win the war. And after that, we're going to help you rule the world. All right? And that's essentially what the Atlantic Charter discusses. Okay? I know this is all really complicated and I know it's all a lot, but it's what you got to know. All right? Okay. So there's the Atlantic Charter. It symbolizes a formal alliance, okay? So here's a good question, and I didn't come up with this, but I love this question. It says, can the U.S. claim neutrality after the Atlantic Charter is signed? The U.S. is no longer neutral for sure, and they never really were, but they definitely can't claim to be neutral after this, because this is showing, hey, shaking hands, we're saying, hey, we're buddies now, and you were fighting the Nazis. My friend's enemy is now my enemy. So the Nazis were the enemy to the United States because of this, okay? All right, so let's write these down. What did FDR suggest as the best action to take against aggressive nations in his quarantine speech? To isolate them by stopping trade. Saying, hey, we're cutting you off, you don't get access to our stuff, and it's going to hurt you by stopping trade. All right, what are the 4 freedoms? That is freedom of speech, freedom of religion. I'm just going to do this right here. Freedom from want, meaning you shouldn't have to go hungry at night or need clothing or, just general freedom in life. And freedom from fear, meaning at night you shouldn't have to lay down and worry that Nazi Germany is going to come take over your country. Okay? So freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. Let me see how that looks. Make sure it's legible. I think it's okay. We got a little bit of a glare back here. My blinds are broken, so we're gonna have to just kind of deal with the glare. Okay? Very good. Sweet. All right. What did the Lend Lease Act do, and what did it signify for the American attitude towards the war? All right, so let's do a couple of things here. Whoa, it's red. Let's go with that. Actually, let's switch it because that red might be hard to see. All right, cool. So the Lend Lease Act, it offered food, oil, and weapons to the Allies. And they said, hey, you can pay us back later. And what did it show? It showed the U.S. supported the Allies. So they're in this thing. They're getting in the war. We're helping out the Allies. We're definitely not neutral anymore. Even though we claim to be neutral, we haven't declared war or anything like that. We're in it. We're in it. Okay? We're not fighting yet, but we're in it. What is the overall purpose or content of the Atlantic Charter? Establish friendship friendship between the US, and the British. Okay, and it also discussed how to rule the world after the war. So this is a little presumptuous of the United States, and it's bold. It's giving a big statement to the Axis powers, to Nazi Germany, where they're saying, hey, we realize we're probably going to have to get in this thing. We're already kind of in this thing. I mean, we're offering all this stuff. And so what we're going to say, we're going to make a big statement. We're going to say, well, after we whoop y'all, us and the British, we're going to tell you how we're going to rule the world. And so Nazi Germany, they're kind of like, wow, okay, US. Japan, wow, okay, US. And so we're actually going to get involved in the war pretty quick after this, all right? Unfortunately, we won't actually get to that part of the war yet, and now we got to talk a little bit about the Holocaust. I'm going to be straight up and honest with you. There's going to be some graphic images in this. The Holocaust is a very graphic thing that happened, and I think it's very important that we remember that this happened. I don't really think it's ever going to happen again, at least not like this. But it's important to remember it in order to prevent it from happening again. You know, they say those that don't know history are doomed to repeat it. I kind of believe that. So I'm just giving you forewarning straight up front. There's going to be some bad images in this, okay? There's going to be some death, all right? So let's go ahead and jump in and talk about what did the United States, how was their response to the struggles of European Jews? Because Hitler and Nazi Germany started doing bad things to European Jews in the middle of the 1930s. This happens before the war begins because Hitler, for some reason, saw the Jews as a problem. And so his goal was to eliminate all of them. It's really bad, it's really ugly, and let's discuss it. Now, the United States, I'm just going to be upfront and honest, in regards to the Holocaust, didn't do much to help the European Jews, okay? So here's the deal. Remember, we've already talked about this with the Immigration Quota Acts. The United States did not want a lot of immigrants coming in for various reasons. There's nativism, and really there was a problem going on in the U.S. called the Depression, and they said, look, we already can't support our own people. We can't bring in any immigrants and give them jobs because our people here at home don't have jobs already. So they use it as kind of that way, but they just kind of ignore this thing for a long time. They say, no, we can't take any new people. So sorry. They blame it on the Depression, but history makes this seem really ugly, okay? And it is really ugly. So in 1938, there was a survey that was sent out to the Americans. And remember, this is the Depression still going on. 67% of people in the United States responded, with conditions as they are, we should try to keep out Jewish refugees. In other words, people who are being persecuted, people who are being killed by the Nazis. 67% of Americans said, don't let them come here. So it's not totally the government's fault, and it's the citizens' fault a little bit. And I don't want to point fingers at all, but that's the facts. That's what happened, okay? So let's just move on and rock and roll. And this makes me feel awkward too, okay? All right, now something bad did happen. Let's see, I don't remember what year this was, I apologize, but it's in the 1930s, maybe even into the 1940s. A ship escaped from Europe, and they wanted to come to North America. They landed in Cuba. Cuba rejected them, and what it is, it's a ship full of European Jews. There were 900 aboard, okay? So they initially landed in Cuba. Cuba said, no, you can't land here. This is a foreign country. We don't know who y'all are. I'm sorry. So then they try to go to Florida. Florida accepts some of them who had a passport and a visa and all the important paperwork that you need. But overall, the United States rejects these people who tried to leave Europe on this boat. It was called the St. Louis. And they eventually were forced to return to Europe. Now, fortunately, some of the countries like the Netherlands, Belgium, and I think Great Britain accepted some of these Jews, but a lot of them ended up going to a concentration camp. And unfortunately, of the 900 people on board, 225 of them, we know this for a fact, 225 of them were killed by Nazis because they were not allowed to land in the United States. the facts of this are really horrifying to me. That really kind of makes me sick, because you can look at this image, you can imagine these people are hopeful, they're escaping a terrible place, coming to a place that is like a land of opportunity. They think they're going to have freedom, they think they're going to be okay, and then they're forced to go back to a terrible place where the Holocaust was going on, and unfortunately some of them did die. So you can see, and what I always make my students do, and what I'd like for you to do at home, is imagine the 225 could be in this image. This could be some of them right there, who were not allowed to come into the United States for various reasons, and it doesn't matter, that part doesn't really matter now. The fact is that this happened, and it's really terrible, it's really sad. But yeah, I'll let you soak that in for just a second. It's tough. All right, let's move along. So again, and you can see the woman crying there. They've been rejected, they've been turned away, they've received the news that they've got to go back. Really rough stuff. Unfortunately, the Holocaust didn't get any attention in the media, and honestly, it's not totally the America's fault as far as it being ignored. The Nazis did a pretty good job of covering up just how bad the Holocaust really was. The extermination camps like Auschwitz and Dachau and all the really bad ones, they were pretty well hidden. And until the United States soldiers, the troops, actually got into these Holocaust camps and liberated them, America didn't fully understand what exactly was going on. Remember, this wasn't the age of the internet. This was an age where media news moved pretty slowly. So America didn't really understand. But looking back at it in history, we may have had some clues, the government at least may have had some clues, especially Roosevelt. You got to think he's leader of the most powerful country in the world at the time. They probably had spies and probably could figure this out, that something really bad was going on. But they didn't really do anything about it, which is really unfortunate, because it makes Roosevelt look really bad in retrospect that he didn't do anything about the Holocaust, and it kind of makes America look really bad that we didn't do more early on. Yes, in 1945 we did liberate the Nazi concentration camps, and we did liberate the Jews there. By then it was almost too late. 6 million Jews were dead, and various other groups of people were dead, and it's just a really, really dark time in history, okay? All right. So I'll let you look at this. We got to rock and roll. We got to keep moving because this video is getting a little long, but we need to keep moving. All right, now, in 1945, America has infiltrated Europe well enough that they start reaching the concentration camps. They reached Dachau in April of 1945, and in May they reached Mauthausen. And this is when we get the terrible images of the Holocaust, these typical images that you see of people literally starving to death, piles and piles of dead bodies. There is a whole lot of footage of the Holocaust that is out there. I don't want to discourage you from watching it, but I also can't encourage you from watching it. But it is truly, truly horrifying and disgusting what Nazi Germany did to these Jewish people. I'm going to show you some images now. I'm going to give you a straight up forewarning now that it's about to get real graphic. I'm not even going to talk about them. I'm just going to show them to you, okay? So here we go. These are images that were captured when the Holocaust camps were liberated. So, yeah. There's some there. There's some here. Let's see. These are dead bodies, by the way. Okay. It's unfortunate. It is good that the United States did liberate these camps and all that happened, but it didn't get really much better after the war. Unfortunately, most of these people, their families, totally wiped out. Their homes totally wiped out. Europe is essentially destroyed by World War II, and we'll talk about that later on. Europe is just burned down, basically, by World War II. It's a terrible, terrible war. We'll get into the specifics of what actually happened in the war later. But after the Holocaust is over, these Jewish people, a lot of them, they don't have anywhere to go. Their homes are gone. All their jobs are gone. Their families, most of them are dead, or they're lost, or totally displaced, and so they don't have anywhere to go. So there's a problem. They set up refugee camps all over Europe, but unfortunately the refugee camps weren't much better than where they had already been living in the concentration camps. Poverty was huge in Europe after the war. Europe has literally got to rebuild from the ground up. There's no proper food, not a lot of sanitation, and not only that, they're set up with guards by military forces. So various European countries and Americans had to guard these people because they don't know what they're going to do and where they're going to go. So yes, concentration camps were ended at the end of the war. However, a lot of these people, and I'm going to show you some pictures, still had to live in really terrible conditions. And then finally, in the early 1950s, they finally allowed more people to start coming into the United States, and about 415,000 Jewish refugees leave Europe and come to the United States. Okay? So that actually is a good thing. But here's a picture of what these people lived in after the Holocaust, and you can see it's just not that much different. And it's really, really sad. It's really unfortunate that this happened. This is just a bad part of human history. Okay? All right, so you see there they are. But they did look, it was a good thing that eventually that they did get to leave Europe. And, some of them did go back to their original homes in Europe and were able to kind of rebuild. All right. Okay. Glad that heavy topic is over with, but I hope you really got that, okay? Describe America's Holocaust to the response prior to 1945. America largely ignored the Holocaust. Okay. Oops. And we talked about the various reasons why. There's an anti-immigration thing. The Depression is going on in the United States, which is not an excuse, but it's the excuse they used. Largely ignored the Holocaust. Okay. What impact did the liberation of concentration camps have on the world? It shocked them, shocked the world, and horrified the world. A lot of people looked and they said, how did we let this happen? How did they let this happen? And we kind of, in history, we can look at that and say, how did this happen? And honestly, I'm dumbfounded. I don't really know. All right. What conditions did Jews face after the war? They are refugees, living in refugee camps. They face poverty. They face lack of food, lack of sanitation, lack of clothing, lack of clean water, etc. Okay? When they were finally allowed entry, how many Jewish immigrants came to the United States? I believe the number was 415,000. Okay? And I think that's that. Let me look and make sure you can see it. Pause it if you need to. There we go. All right. There it is if you need it. And let me make sure. I think that's it. Yeah, that's it. Okay. So in this video, we talked about the terrible political ideologies that existed in Europe prior to the war. From there, we went to FDR's response to the war, which is essentially moving us from a place of neutrality, which we weren't really neutral, to a place of we're helping out the Allies and we're getting more involved by basically sending food, oil, and equipment. Then from there, we went to the Holocaust, and you saw how that was. America largely didn't really pay attention to the Holocaust early on, and unfortunately it looks like a big mistake in our human history. So yeah. I really feel kind of down. I'm kind of sick after that one. That's unfortunate. In the next video, we'll go over the actual, we're getting into the war. We'll talk about Pearl Harbor. In the next video, we'll also talk about big battles, and we'll talk about the people. So we get into kind of the meat of World War II. So stay tuned for that one, and it will be hopefully less depressing and a little more exciting. Hopefully you got all that. If you need help, remember download the PowerPoint from my website. Remember email me if you have any questions. And yeah, we'll rock and roll from there. Good job. Been enjoying reading all your responses on all the answers. Y'all are doing a great job. Keep up the good work, and we'll see you next time. Bye!